Well, hey everybody, it's Casey Jaycox with the Quarterback Dadcast. We are in season 6, and we are continuing to roll right along. And our next guest is someone I met at the wide world of TechServe. He is a board member at TechServe. His name is Tim Glennnie, and we actually met in like a breakout session. And he asked a great question that we ended up just kind of shooting the you know what. And next thing you know, I ran into him again, and next thing you know, he's somehow got convinced to come on the old Quarterback Dadcast. But he's the managing partner of Bridgeview Technology Consulting, a fantastic firm doing really great things. He's a South Florida Bull. Maybe we'll learn a little bit more about that. And as I mentioned, he's also a board member of the TechServe Alliance. So if you're a staffing company out there and you don't know anything about TechServe, make sure you check them out. It's a great organization. So shout out to Susan Donahoe and team. But with all that said, that's not why we're having Tim here. We're having Tim here to talk about Tim the dad and how he's working hard to become that ultimate quarterback or leader of his household. So without further ado, Mr. Glennnie, welcome to the Quarterback Dadcast.
Casey, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
You bet, man. Well, I'm grateful. I'm grateful you're here. And so with that word in mind, we always start out each episode with gratitude. So tell me, what are you most grateful for as a dad today?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, something specific happened last night, and I actually talked about it at my leadership team this morning. So we were finishing up dinner, and at the end of dinner, once a week, my wife has these deliveries like a home chef where they deliver all the ingredients and you have to cook it up and make a dinner. At the end of dinner, my one of my sons said, "Hey, mom, after dinner, can I go on the home chef site with you and order next week's dinner?" And she's like, "Sure." And I was like, "Oh, that's great initiative, Rhett." And she said, "Yeah." She goes, "Well, he doesn't like it because I always order chicken." And I said, "You're right, but you know what? He didn't complain about it. He was proactive and just wants to look for a different option and is becoming part of the solution and not part of the problem and complaining." So I viewed that as something as a parent, like, wow, I like how that, integrated into his DNA.
Yeah, that's a great story. And yeah, and when they get to be a part of it, it's even better.
Yeah.
It's proactive. It's showing a little curiosity, and shout out to mom and dad. You obviously have created the environment for him to feel comfortable to come ask you to be a part of that too.
100%. Yeah. And I think, it's cool with kids because he's one of my more curious kids in the kitchen and will try to create his own concoctions. And I was like, hey, if you ordered, are you good cooking it too? Right. And just, I think a lot of times, the parents get used to just preparing the food. And I think it's important to bring the kids into the kitchen and, stimulate their curiosity and how it goes and to help prepare things.
Yeah, spot on, man. Well, I'm grateful for a couple of things. One, we're recording on February 20th. This episode will come out in a month or so, and today is my 26th wedding anniversary. So I'm grateful for my wife. I'm grateful for our two amazing kids that we've. One, I got off into college, which makes me feel. I still don't feel like I'm almost 49 years old, but I am, and
Yes.
uh, it's just crazy to think. And I have a junior in high school, and I'm grateful I get to watch her play in a playoff game tomorrow night, which is going to be so much fun. And fingers crossed, the basketball gods are on our side and can bring home a
Yeah.
dub. But just grateful for my wife and 26 years of marriage. So I thought I'd give her some shout out today.
Well, a big congrats on that. I mean, we've been married almost 24 years, and 26 is a testament, and I'm assuming it's a pretty good 26 years, right? You guys are still together, have the kids, and so congrats to both of you.
Yeah, thank you. Believe it or not, man, we actually met in seventh grade.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Yeah, so like I'm see 40. She's 49. I'll be 49 next month in March, and so we met when we were 12. So
What's 26, 25 silver, right? I don't know what
so
26 is.
I don't cubic zirconium. I mean, I
That's
don't
great.
know. Well, bring me inside the Glennie huddle. Well, I'm guessing you're the quarterback. Well, most wives are the general manager. But tell me
Yeah.
how you and your wife met, and then about each member of the team.
Sure. Yeah. So my wife and I met up in Boulder, Colorado. You mentioned I'm a South Florida Bull, so I graduated school and packed up everything I owned. I bought a pickup truck and got a topper, drove out to Boulder, got a job, and I was working. And ironically, a guy that I went to college with, I used to play in bands in college, and he moved out to Boulder. Said, "Hey, you want to join this band?" I said, "Sure, I'll do it." And we were playing a gig, and my wife showed up at the gig. It was a house party on St. Patty's Day, and her friend had a crush on the singer in the band, and she just came along, didn't really want to come, and we ended up striking up a conversation and talking if she wanted to learn how to snowboard. And I was like, hey, I snowboard. Let's go snowboarding sometime. And I remember she wrote me a cool little note, like with a snowboarder, and like, hey, let's go snowboarding sometime, and just hit it off. And there was like immediate connection. And yeah, that was, let me see, 28 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. And then tell us about the kids.
Yeah, so I've got three kids. My oldest is my daughter, Ireland. She just turned 18. She's a senior over at South High School. And I've got twin boys, Logan and Rhett, and they're 13 in eighth grade.
Yeah, I love those names.
Thank you.
Is there any story behind that?
Yeah, there is actually. So, my wife and I, once we were together, and I think it might even been before we're married, like when we just start dreaming about our future together, um, we we both have come from Irish heritage and love the name Ireland and thought that'd be a really cool name for a kid. And so we're like, all right, we got one in the bag, and then the name Logan we also liked for similar and different reasons. When we were dating, we both lived on Logan Street here in Denver. She lived on one end, I lived on the other. And there was also a show when I was a kid called Logan's Run. You may remember, and I just always thought like Logan just had a really cool sound to it. Just a great name, and both names could go to either gender, right? I mean, they're kind of just flexible names, and yeah. So we had my daughter, and it was immediately like, boom, that's going to be Ireland, right? And then so we had one in the bank. We had Logan in the bank, and then 4 years later, we get pregnant with twins. We're like, oh, what we got Logan, what about the other one? And it's funny because the first two came really quick, right? And then the third one, we talked for months during the pregnancy about, oh, we're going to do it. And I'm a musician, really into music, and I was thinking of names like Hendrix and Page, like great guitar players and stuff like that, and just again trying to think of something unique as a first name. My wife's first name is Anastasia, and her parents didn't give her a middle name, so she got married and wanted to take my name that she could use her maiden name as her middle name, which I thought was really cool. And then we did the same with my daughter. We're like Ireland, and we won't give her a middle name. And then she gets married and wants to take that name, she can keep her maiden name as a middle name. So just kind of a technique we have. But anyway, so we're going through all these names, can't find anything. And like she'd shoot me names, and I'm like, nope, nope. I'd give her names. I'm like, nope, nope. We just weren't getting on the same page. And it was right around Christmas, and we're putting together a Christmas tree, and my wife does a real nice job getting all these ornaments that mean something to her. And we had these two ornaments from Gone with the Wind, had Scarlett O'Hara and Rhett Butler, and it says their names on the ornament, right? And she put up the Rhett Butler, with the handsome Clark Gable on there, and she goes, "What about Rhett?" And as soon as she said it, I said, "Yep." And we got the name, and it stuck. And yeah, really glad we got it.
That's cool. That's cool. Um, how did you get into music out of curiosity?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm a child. I was born in '72 and was born in New York, and I had a couple older brothers and an older sister. And my oldest brother, he had a vinyl collection, and he's always playing like the Led Zeppelins and Kiss and Aerosmith and all that stuff. I'm sure you can around the same time as you. Um, and it was all great. And my dad had a nylon string acoustic guitar, classical guitar, and I remember listening to Led Zeppelin, like "Whole Lot of Love," but and when it has like the little pick slide on it, and I used to just pick, I was like 5 years old, and I just pick the guitar out of the case and try to make that pick sliding sound, and that kind of really got me started. But when I was 12, I got hold of the first Jimi Hendrix record, and that just blew my mind, right? And I became a disciple of Jimi Hendrix, and it's funny because at the time that was in the '80s, and here's a guy from the '60s, and I just locked onto it and just really connected with him. And I'm like, I want to learn how to play guitar. And that year, I was 12 years old, and my birthday's in October. And my mom says, "Well, what do you want for your birthday?" And I said, "Well, I want to roll my birthday and Christmas present into one thing."
Solid.
And because I knew there was kind of a budget, for each one. And she's like, "Okay, well, why is that?" And I said, "Well, I want to get a guitar." And she said, "Okay." So we went to the local, at the time I was living in Covington, Louisiana, which is a small town outside of New Orleans. Went to this little house that was the music shop, and I got this Eddie Van Halen replica guitar, like with the red and white tape on it and everything. And she's like, "All right, forget about it. Put it under the Christmas tree." And I remember I got the guitar and I started playing it. And I'm like, God, I can't really hear anything. I didn't know anything, right? Like about guitars and electricity. And then I was like, I figured out, Mom, I need an amp with this thing. That's going to cost more money. And so we went to the store, and like there's a little 10-inch amp, and is like another $100 or something. And she's like, all right, well, I'm gonna give you $1 a day for doing dishes, so you got 100 days worth of doing dishes, and then I found out later I could also press my dad's shirts for $1, so I started knocking that out pretty quick. And yeah, once I got that, took some lessons, and just off to the races.
And do you still play?
I do, yeah, yeah. It comes and goes. I got really serious about it, my mid-teens, and started joining some bands, and during college, got in a couple bands. One caught a lot of traction right around the early '90s, kind of in the grunge era, and we were playing all original music, and opened up for some national bands, did some touring, and played, probably biggest crowds, 1,200, 1,500 people, played, a bunch of theaters and clubs. And um, we had some bands coming up at the same time as us, like Marilyn Manson was in our neck of the woods. So we were playing with those guys. And, they were like one of the first bands. They got signed to Trent Reznor's label, and a couple other guys. And, we kind of saw the pathway. And I just decided at a certain point, like, for the band, I was our quasi manager, because I was kind of a business guy, and it's just an ugly business I didn't want any part of. Like I'd see these guys, like one of our friends got signed to Capitol Records, and they immediately made the band change their name, change their sound. And plus, they had to borrow $200,000 from the record company and go into debt. And the chances of them ever making that back were slim. And I was like, okay, so you sell your soul to make the record, go in debt, and it's not even the music you want to make. You've got a different name. You're in a different genre. They're like, oh, grunge is hot right now, do that, or indie pop is, do that. And it's just, it wasn't very appealing to me.
Yeah. No, I hear you. It's funny. I am self-taught guitar. I love playing. I mean, I play in spurts. Sometimes the more beers I have, the more I play.
Yeah,
But it's fun to I don't know how to pluck, but I can strum. And
yeah,
I just go to like those like guitar tab sites. You can kind of like see the music,
yeah,
when to kind of change. And I can hear it, I know how to pick up the strum thing, but I'm not musically trained in guitar, but it's
yeah.
very, very therapeutic. Um,
Yeah, yeah. So it sounds like you've got, so some people have a natural ear for music. I had that. Like I used to, listen to cassettes and CDs, and I would just listen and figure out what chords they were playing, and then you just kind of assume everybody knows how to do that, right? And then when I would listen to records, I could isolate the tracks in my head. Oh, listen to the bass, or there's a cool thing like I'm sure you listen to Guns N' Roses, and the Appetite for Destruction was a huge album. And one thing I learned is if you pan it left, you only hear Slash's guitar, and if you pan it right, you hear Izzy's guitar. And Slash was lead and Izzy was rhythm. And when you isolate their tracks, you get a better understanding of what they're actually playing versus the blended. When you put it in stereo, you're hearing the panoramic sound. Um, yeah, but I'll tell you, or just anybody listening to this, like with picking, first I say is you do what I when I watch musicians, I always study what they're doing. If they're playing with a pick, if they're playing with their fingers. Some people use their finger as a pick, or they have, like, if you listen to Blackbird by the Beatles, which I think is one of the best songs out there. Paul was, like, kind of a failed guitarist who took over bass in the Beatles, and he just uses two fingers on that, and it's like two strings for the most part, and he's just plucking. But it's this beautiful song with these augmented chords. And you got guys like Billy Strings that could do anything on a guitar. But to me, I think some of the most beautiful is when you just see people kind of create their own way to play. And that's the beautiful thing with the guitar, like it's just, if it sounds good, do it.
yeah. My father-in-law can play that song Bluebird. He learned it in college,
Yeah.
and he doesn't play much, but he still can play it. And it's pretty cool. It's a really, really good
It's
song.
it's a fun. Yeah, I learned it. We had friends that got married, and they asked me and another buddy to do kind of like an instrumental set, and that was one of the songs. I did just kind of solo there, and it's not a super complex song. I think it's in G, but there's all these just augmented chords, and you have to remember the transition because it's not like playing an A, G, F type thing. It's like two little two note chords all up and down at like the A and the B string, and you just kind of gotta. Once you get it, it's easy, but it's funny because certain songs I remember how to play forever, and some I could never remember. Some just get sticky in my brain, and some I could learn them, and especially the more complex they are, but then it just goes away.
Well, I'm going to give some love to. So I met a guy named Adam Hood, who I met
Okay.
at Staffing World.
Yeah.
He was the music that they brought in, and I actually met a couple other executives, and I was just being a curious person, and networking for my whole life in business development. I'm like, ooh, he's a dad. I want to talk to him.
Yeah.
And so I
Yeah.
just kind of put it out there. Well, he's like I love his music. He's like really, really good country music guy,
Okay.
about our age, private. Um, but his music, I think one of his songs up for a Grammy right now.
Oh, that's
So
awesome.
music people check him out. And then there's also my buddy, actually, he from where I live in Seattle area. His kids are in the Denver area, and they have a new band called Marfa, Marfa,
Oh, nice.
and they're like blowing up. And
I'll have
so if
to
you're,
check that out. Marfa, I'm gonna
yeah,
write that down.
Marfa, yeah. So I'll give those guys some love. But
Yeah, Denver's got a good music scene. That's where I'm at, and the Lumineers are probably the latest big
oh, I
band out of
love them.
here. Before that, it was the Fray and Nathaniel
Love,
Rateliff and the
yeah.
Night Sweats, and yeah, we've got Big Head Todd and the Monsters. That's from back in the day, and we've got a number of bands that have come through out of Denver. So we have a real music scene. Like they do something called the Underground Music Series every July, and there's like 10 clubs on Broadway, which is one of the main strips, kind of in a fun, funky part of town, and they'll have like 300 bands play, and it's just amazing.
Wow. Well, I want to transition back to what was life like for Tim growing up, and talk about mom and dad and the impact they had on you now that you're a dad.
Yeah, sure. Uh, Two different tales, right? How I grew up and how I'm raising my kids. Yeah, I was born Green Lawn, New York. My dad worked in the city in New York City. He worked for Citigroup. He was like a banking, kind of like consulting, kind of executive type guy, and helped regional banks do stuff. So he was busy a lot. He traveled a lot because he was going out to see regional banks and help them out. My mom was stayed home. I was the youngest of four kids. So my siblings helped out a lot. My sister was the oldest. She's 8 years older, so she was kind of like mom number two. Yeah, my dad loved him to death. He passed away 6 years ago, but he was more of an isolationist, and I think it was kind of talking to a lot of people my age, kind of a product of the time. Like he was more interested in his own pursuits than being like a full time dad. And if you like to do what he did, you got his time. And if you didn't, you didn't see him. He wasn't like the go through the football or baseball in the backyard type dad. He's like, hey, I'm working on a project in the garage. You want to come help me? Or I want to go sail my sailboat. You want to go sailing? So, I would just adopt whatever interest he had. Like, yeah, I'll be your first mate on the boat and go sailing or do whatever. And just to get time with them, right? Because I crave time. And, my mom was kind of the opposite. She was a nurse before they got married. And, she's a really great caretaker and, always shuttling us around and doing different stuff. But I grew up, it was kind of like a little hamlet, Green Lawn, New York. It was very safe. I won't say rural. I mean, you hear Long Island, New York, people might have one conception, but like we had a lot of open space, lived in a good neighborhood on a cul-de-sac, and we had open space behind our house where I was riding my bike to school by myself in first grade. I remember going to Pee Wee, what do you call it, T-ball games, where I would have my cleats on my handlebar, my glove on the other side, and I was 6 years old, and I was riding myself to playing games. Which I look at my kids now, and I'm like, that never. And I live in the city, but I'm like, still like never would have happened. So I was a latchkey kid. I had a lot of space. It was kind of like, in the summers, like, hey, come home when when it gets dark, right? And you just me and my brother that's closest to me is 2 years older, so we would just go off with our friends and you know go play imaginary games out in the neighborhood in the woods and stuff like that.
Isn't it crazy how much times changed? I mean, you live in the Sandlot movie. You're a
Yeah,
character of that movie.
100%, 100%. Yeah, no, it's I feel fortunate for it. And I'm glad we made it through because, I definitely, my brother and I are still really close, and I'm like, did we really do that, or go hop that fence, or go do whatever crazy thing we were doing, and put a bunch of bottle rockets in something, and whatever happened, and like, yeah, because like I know you're from the Pacific Northwest, but like on the East Coast, we used to have these things in our neighborhood called sumps, which were like kind of look like a football field, but inverted in the ground for flooding and stuff. But for the most time, it was just like this big, huge area that was fenced off that you were dying to get into, but it was generally overgrown. There's probably possums and whatever else, raccoons and stuff in there. And, anything that you could sneak into, we wanted to sneak into, scale a big fence or, go climbing up trees. And we did a lot of tree climbing. And, we did Cub Scouts when I was young. And I don't know if you did Cub Scouts, but like, they do a lot of adventure based stuff and, kind of you make things and, figure out games and, kind of a lot of survival stuff.
Are you handy now?
Yeah.
See, I am. I've made fun of myself multiple times on this lovely podcast. Where, like, if you Googled "worst handiest douchebag,"
Yeah.
and then click images, I'm probably going to come up.
Yeah.
I
Yeah. It's
wish I
funny because
was.
I, I'm, I think I'm accidentally handy, like out of necessity, I think more than anything, I'm a seeker. I'm a curious guy. Right. And, I like to figure out how stuff works. Like when I was a kid, they used to have these little, way before Game Boys, they'd have these little handheld games, that you'd play one game on it, like Frogger or something like that, or, Tetris or whatever. And I would sit there and look at the package, the plastic case it was in. And I'm like, what makes this thing run? And sometimes I broke them open just to see, oh, there's a chipboard in here, and then this chip, and where does the battery go in, and how is it connected, and how are the wires? Like, I'd always try to get like my parents, like at Radio Shack, they used to have like these erector sets, or you make your own radio, and I was just always curious how you put things together, how they work, and that kind of back ended me into like handy stuff.
It's funny. I'm a great secondhand though. Like, if I just don't have that mind to see it,
Yeah,
I'm like crazy curious from like an EQ perspective. From like, but IQ, I just don't. But once it's built, I'm like, oh, that makes total sense in the world.
yeah,
So my buddies, I have a couple of buddies who are like, really, really, really handy. And I love having those buddies. It's kind of like you want a friend with a boat, you just don't have a boat, but you want that,
yeah.
have them to have the boat.
Yeah, I think, a lot of what I've learned in life, Casey, and I'm curious if you went through something similar, is I learned things by figuring it out and not getting like the proper instruction. Like my dad was not a handy guy. Like it's funny, like I remember my early years when we lived in New York and we had a basement, he had like a little workshop area. Anytime something would break in our house, like a toaster oven, a hair dryer, whatever it was, he'd say, "Oh, don't throw that out. I'll fix that." And there was this pile in the basement next to his workbench. There was like five hair dryers, a couple of toasters, whatever it was that wasn't working. And he never, but so I know that he had that curiosity and, probably overconfident that he could fix things, or whether, as an adult looking back, either he didn't have the time or he just, I never saw him fix any of that stuff, but he did have a pretty good tool set up. And one thing that just relates to me being a dad is, I love being in the garage. I've got a workbench. I've got a lot of tools. Um, and I remember my dad, he had this workbench and a lot of tools. I never saw him doing it, but I always had this curiosity like, hey, what does this tool do? Or what is this? I remember we used to have something called liquid gold. I don't know if you ever saw that. It was like
Oh
Scott's
yeah.
liquid gold. And it was
Yeah.
kind of like a heavy cement kind of glue thing. And, I'd try to find applications. I just like this, oh, this packaging looks cool. What can I use that on? And, fast forward to now, and I've got this cool workbench set up, and my boys have really gravitated. I could tell when they've messed in it, and then I make rules like, hey, these are my tools. You could use them, but you got to respect my tools. If you use them, they go back in this certain spot, so I know where to find it. Because like if you call me asking for a tool, I can tell you exactly where it is. Left hand bottom drawer, you can get the power drill and the drill bits, right? And there's a reason for the system. And so, and they're learning, I mean, I love that they have that same curiosity. Like
Yeah.
they've got these new e-bikes that they're always modifying and stuff and using my tools. And I just love seeing that same curiosity in my kids.
It's awesome. That's so cool. Well, sorry your pops passed. My dad, I lost my dad December 29th, 2021. So we have that in
Yeah.
common.
Yeah.
as you reflect back though from like a um, like the values that mom and dad taught you,
Yeah.
what tell me what comes to mind, maybe through a story too.
Yeah, sure. I definitely grew up in a pretty, well, it's interesting because I was the fourth of four kids, and I've come to meet other people that were that way as well. And I kind of learned this looking back on it. When you're the fourth of four, your parents are kind of worn out by the time you're born. And I relate to this because I know when we had my first kid, my daughter, like when you're setting up your house, you want everything clean and sterilized, and you want to do everything perfect, right? And oh, you got to make sure to sanitize this bottle and do this and do that. And once you go through a few iterations with the kid and dirty diapers and oh, just grab whatever bottle you can. The time the second set kids came around, I was like, it's fine. You don't need to sterilize that. They're like, you're not going to kill them. Like these kids are resilient. And so I use that analogy because I think when I was coming up, my parents were a bit looser with me than they might have been with my older kids because they're like, oh, well, we didn't break these ones, so that one should be fine. And yeah, so, but as far as values, I think definitely commitment. I grew up in a Catholic household, and like every Sunday was church. Rain or shine, you did, unless you were hospital sick, you went to church, right? Whether you wanted to go or not, and you dressed up nice, right? So, and we had to do, it's called catechism, but Sunday school to most other people that go to church. And so, it's tough when you're a young kid. You don't have attention span, right? And to sit in church and, in the Catholic church, it's basically the same exact thing except for the 5-minute sermon every mass. So it's very repetitive and I think hard for a young kid to focus. And then, Sunday school after, at least with some variety, learning different stories, about Jesus and the disciples every time. And even though I didn't like going to it, I realized in hindsight the moral fiber that it was building within me, and the difference between right and wrong, and knowing that if I did something wrong I had to go to confession, and atoning for transgressions, whether it's like stealing the last Twinkie, having two Twinkies so somebody else didn't get one or whatever it was when I was a kid, that type of stuff. And it gave me a good compass. When it came to hard work, my dad definitely put us to work at an early age. And, whether it was cutting grass, pulling weeds, washing his cars, and doing all that stuff. And I always kind of felt like he was outsourcing it to us, so he didn't have to do it. Because I did it a lot younger than most of my, like I was using a ride-on lawnmower at 10 years old. I didn't allow a lot of 10 year
Oh,
olds
good.
driving a ride-on lawnmower. And I'll tell you this: my dad, when he would do chores, and he was a finance guy, right? So he had his MBA and CPA and worked in banks, so he's very specific about money. And he worked with a lot of wealthy people, and we were not. We were middle class, and he would he would tell me stuff about like the wealthy and what they did different and stuff like that. And when he would pay us for chores, he said, I'm going to pay you minimum wage. And he'd back out what taxes would be. So if it was $3 for minimum wage, it's like, here's $2.13. I'm like, where's the $3? It's like, no, when you work, they take taxes out. And I thought, no other parents were doing that. And I was like, dude, that's pretty hardcore. Now as an adult, he was teaching me the value of a dollar, and trying to prepare me for the world and what was to come, instead of just, I mean, he could easily paid me $5 instead of $3, and not taking any tax out. But he was trying to teach me something, and it wasn't about the money. I didn't get it at the time, but I get it now.
I actually had a friend that did that. He did tax, he did 401k.
Yeah.
And his kid's like, what the hell? But it's like, I think that's genius. I mean, you're what, 52? My
Yeah.
math's right, 51. And you remember that still to this day.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, have you applied that same lesson to your kids?
In different ways, yeah. I mean, it's different times, right? So I've been very fortunate in my career, and successful financially, but I'm very tight with my kids. Like there's a lot of stuff they want that I could easily get them and stop doing, but I make them work for it, right? And I really instilled, like, if you want something, you have to work for it. And when you do work, there's a phrase, it's common, but I use it a lot. Anything worth doing is worth doing right. And if I see them do something half-ass, I call it out and I explain the importance of doing it. You do something half-assed, somebody else has to go fix it. Now, twice the amount of time has been wasted in what you're doing, and you're putting a burden on somebody else. And really try to teach them the principles that align with the outcome of what their actions are. Yeah, so like they have a small allowance, and they have to do chores to get it. And yeah, we've used all kinds of stuff like that to work them through. It's not the exact example of my dad, but it's really I think an iteration that I've done it with them is really exposing them to what things cost. Because my kids have experienced a lot more at a young age than I did, right? For example, like my kids have been to Hawaii multiple times. I didn't go to Hawaii till I got married and paid for a nice honeymoon there. My kids have been to Mexico, they've been to Costa Rica, they're going to Europe this summer. And I'm like, this stuff costs real money. And I'm like, you're going to have a different challenge than me. I was motivated when I was a kid because I never went to those places. And my parents would go to Hawaii. My dad would go on a boondoggle business trip, and we get left at home with some crazy babysitter that was chasing me around the house. And, um, my kids are getting to go on these things, but like I talk about the cost, and I'm like, hey, do you know how much this hotel costs that we're staying in? And like when you go to work, when you're 20, you're not going to be able to afford this and do this yourself unless you hit it out of the park. So I want you to appreciate it and what we're having, but know that it takes a lot of hard work to get here to experience these things and to really have an appreciation for it. Because it's just, it's we're in a different situation than I was in.
Yeah. Yeah. The power of money management, I think, is a really a skill that a lot of kids miss. I think a lot of I don't know about in Denver, but like in Seattle, I don't think our schools do a really good job of teaching finance and money management. Like
Yeah.
I have friends who are in wealth management now, and one of them, he actually went out and started like a literacy program for schools and for colleges. And I have to get like shut. My wife she was really good at. I mean, my parents did a lot of things. I don't remember like learning a lot of checkbooks.
Hmm.
But my wife, when we were in college, I remember she was like, we were saving money before we even got married. Like, all right, you're going to take $25 out of your checking out of
Yeah.
your. I'm like, what are you talking about? She's like, yeah, we're going to use that to save part of our honeymoon. I was like, so she was I was getting taught by my wife, but even now
Yeah.
with kids, we'll do like they'll work at their summer job, and then we take that money, we split it up by the number of months they're in school, and like here's what you get each month.
Yeah.
And when it's out. So,
Yeah.
and you got to have this many days. So you got to pick and choose like what, and the same thing, we could easily give them things, but I think things that are really important to us in our family is like keeping kids grounded. I love the word humility. I love the skill set of humility. I've been around people who've done a really good job of keeping me humble my whole life. And I'm addicted to like never feeling like you've arrived. And I want that same for my kids because
Yeah.
we're all replaceable,
Yeah.
every single one of us. And as much as some people think they're not, you are, and the world will move on. And so
Yeah.
I don't know.
And I think it's important too to let your kids know your success or your failure isn't theirs, for better or worse, right? So, like, my dad, we had some ups and downs growing up. My dad was in the banking industry and he worked at Citigroup for a good number of years. And then he got hired away to run a small local bank in the New Orleans area. And in the 80s, there was a lot of merging of banks. And, the bank got bought. He lost his job. He wasn't working for 6 months and then get hired for another bank. And they get acquired. Then he loses, and he was the head guy, right? So, like, I saw these flashes of what life could be, and then the brutal reality, like, what's my dad doing home for 4 months, and just going through this stuff. And so it was very humbling, and when your friends are coming over, they're like, why is your dad home? Why isn't he at work? And, trying to cover up for it and being embarrassed, like my dad doesn't have a job, and, uh, I think, my kids have just kind of seen my career, has gone generally up over time. And they just assume that's the normal, right? And I saw the struggle within my dad, what he went through, and I appreciated that, and wanted to have my path be a little bit different, which, obviously I figured out. But I have a lot of friends. I've been involved in EO and other organizations where I work with a lot of other entrepreneurs and founders. that you generally are their first generation and have done well, right? And we're all sitting there talking about, like, hey, if you've been fortunate enough to have a certain amount, is giving it to your kids the right move? If so, when do you give it? How much? And then realizing they're not going to have the same struggles as us. Like they may see some of the struggle over time, but they're just coming not by any fault of their own, but they're coming from a different circumstance. And there's been studies of inheritance, and it does more damage than good, and everything else. And so I think it creates a real conundrum from people, whether you're giving you just 10 grand, 100 grand, $1 million. There could be an impact that it's not always good.
No, I know. It's like the scariest thing. Like when you said that story about Hawaii, it made me think like my first time I went to Hawaii was like a senior trip with like buddies and another mom.
Yeah.
And and I think we work really, really hard to make sure that the kids know that this is, we are very blessed and very lucky to
Yeah.
do what we've done, and don't feel guilty about it. But like, and to your point, like I love our mindsets are somewhere on appreciation, like making sure you educate. Like when I left corporate and was trying to figure out what was next, I remember we went to Hawaii with the kids, and my wife and I used miles to upgrade to first, and we made them sit in the back.
Yeah.
And it was the best. We waved to them like, "Hey guys, what's up?" And we're like, "This
Yeah.
is what, yeah. When you work hard and you got a job and you do well, this is where you can sit.
Yeah.
But you don't
Yeah.
have a job yet, so you're going to sit back there."
Yeah. No, I love that. And I've joked to my kids about that. They don't like that joke, and I don't sit in first class, but I've wanted to. And
It's worth it, dude.
yeah,
Do it.
yeah, I know. I might hit you up on that more about the technique, but I could appreciate that. One thing I wanted to talk about, because I know it's coming on this show, and I think it's important. I don't know that we'll hit it, but you started this off, and I love that you started with gratitude, right? And one thing that I started with my daughter, who's my oldest, when we live 2 blocks from the elementary school and middle school, right? So my kids, the first 8 years they walk to school. And so sometimes we'd walk with them. Sometimes, when they're old enough, they want to walk on their own and be cool and not see us. And then, but once my daughter started going to high school in ninth grade, it's like 10 blocks away. So I would just drive her and drop her off on my way to work. And I realized, she's a teenager now, doesn't want to talk to me that much. But this was my glass time. They call it glass time, right? You're in the car with them. This is your time to be able to talk to the kids. And I'm like, okay, this is an important time. What do I want to talk to her about? And I practice meditation and journaling and gratitude, right, and all that stuff. And I started with her, and I said, hey, we're going to practice gratitude. I'm like, give me 2 to 3 things that you're grateful for. And when we first started doing it, she was fighting it and she couldn't think. And I'm like, I'd say, well, let me just go. I'll give you some examples. I'm glad I get to, have this time to talk to you on your way to school. I'm glad it's finally springtime and there's no snow outside and it's sunny today. And I'm glad I woke up early this morning, got a workout in before I headed to work. That's what I'm grateful for. And she's like, oh, that's interesting. And she's like, yeah. And then she would start doing it, and it was a little rough. And then we were doing it, and then after a couple of weeks, and I would always have to prompt her, and like she's like, begrudgingly, teenager being like, rah, rah, rah.
Yeah.
Then she started asking me. She's like, "Oh, I'm grateful for," and she just started doing it naturally, right? And now she's 18, so this is probably when she was 14 we started, and it's just a natural part of the conversation to bring up gratitude. And fast forward now, my boys are right at that age, and I've been driving them, and I've got twins, and they're paternal, so very different personalities. And one of them followed in her footsteps, and as soon as we get in the car, he's like, here's my gratitude, and he goes. And it's funny because his brother sometimes will just copy his gratitude, and we're like, no, 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 we don't care what you say as long as it's not what he said. And but it's just cool to see with them. It's just different because it's like the struggle, right? They're different personalities. Um and I love that. And and I've asked him before, I'm like, do you know why we practice gratitude? And hear what they have to say, right? Because it's one thing to do it, but then to kind of pull back the covers a little bit and say, this is why you practice gratitude, right? And there's a reason for it. And then my wife, on the same tip, just to give a shout out to her, um we try to do a few family dinners a week, where we all sit down and eat together when schedules permit. And uh we do what we call highs and lows, or some people call it the rose and the thorn, right? I mean, it's a common thing, I believe, but if not, here you go. Everybody goes around and they give their highlight from the day and their low light. And and it's great to do. And sometimes all people are like, I got two low lights, I don't have any highs, and it's like, then you might prompt them like, wait, didn't you go on a field trip today and you guys get to go see that cool thing or whatever? And they're like, oh yeah, yeah, you're right. But it's something that's ingrained in our family and just really gets us talking, and it's because, when you ask a eighth grader, how was your day? They're like, oh, school stinks. I hated it. It's like, okay, next question. But the with the highs and lows really causes them to reflect. And it's interesting, like we did it last night, and one of my sons was very specific about two things that day. And then my other son was had to go back a day to find a low, and then went forward a day of something coming up as a high. And again, I don't care where it comes from, because they're engaging in the process.
Yeah. So I don't know if you realize you did this, but I teach something you did. And so at age 41, I learned a framework called TED, which stands for Tell Me,
Hmm.
Explain, Describe. And it is like,
Yeah.
it's, to me, it's like cheat codes. It's
Right.
amazing how it changes conversation. So I use it. I learned it in a business perspective, but I use it on my kids. So, and what you did is you put a number in the question or the number in the gratitude. So if I just said, hey, tell me what you're grateful for. I don't know. But you said, tell me one or two things you're grateful for.
Right.
Now the mind goes to the number. Well, I have to tell two things. I don't know why it works, but it works almost every
Oh
single
yeah.
time. Every
Yeah.
single time.
Yeah.
I was going to tell you one thing. If you want to try this, I learned this from another dad I interviewed. Shout out to Matt Miller. We did this during COVID because that's when I interviewed him, and it was we're big into family dinners too when we can. Obviously, I got a kid in college now, but it's just the
Sure.
three of us. But they'd go around and say, the trick was? I mean, the exercise was you have to say one thing you're grateful for yourself, about you, and maybe the day or what's going on in your life, and then one thing you're grateful for each member of the family.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, and it's
I
kind of
like that.
interesting to see like what your kids like. My kids were at the time they were like would have been you know 10 and 12 or whatever, and or no, a little more than that, maybe 14 and 12, and just to hear them say, "I love Dad that you make me laugh," or
Yeah.
I'm grateful that you always rebound for me," or "I love we got to go play golf together." Um,
Yeah.
or Mike, I love how organized Mom is.
I really dig that. My wife has a similar tradition when we do. Trying to, I'm mixing up my head. It's either on Valentine Days cards that we give each other or on birthday cards. But I think it's on birthday cards when the kids give birthday cards to the parents. And she taught them to write, "I love you because da da da." And it's interesting to see each age that they go through what they're, like, "Hey, Dad, I love you because you taught me how to mountain bike and you take me skiing," right? Or something like that. Or, "Hey, Dad, my daughter, like during COVID, we did a lot of math and had a lot of tears, through math homework, through COVID." So it's just interesting to see, when you put it on them, where their head goes and what they appreciate, and because it's generally not what you would think it would be.
Well, when Ireland goes, does she have plans yet?
Yeah, she's going to go to college. She applied to 11. She's only heard back from four. She got in all four and waiting to hear from
Sweet.
another seven. But her goal is to go to college in Southern California, either in LA or San Diego. So we'll know within a month where she's going. Some of the schools are just a bit slower getting back.
I will warn you, brother.
Yes.
It is brutal. That
Oh yeah.
first. Oh, and so Ryder's been home 3 times. Every time he leaves, I cry. Every time.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's and me and my buddies, we talk about it, and it's like I'm glad I'm not the only one. It's like, but it is so weird when they go. But what's awesome when they go
Hmm.
is the growth you see in them and all the
Yeah.
things like all these things you're teaching them when they come back. Like I mean, I'm obsessed with curiosity. Like my son's
Sure.
girlfriend texted me or she Snapchatted me. She's and reading a magazine, the word curious. She circles it. She goes, "Thought of you." I'm like, okay, yes, you can marry her, please. She's amazing.
Right. Right.
And just seeing like things like one day my son texts me, goes, "It's a picture of my book," and I go, "Do you even know how to read, dude?" I was just like busting his
Yeah.
balls. He's, "Oh, Dad, I'm actually reading this. Is actually, I think, there's a few people I know that might want to learn how to set better expectations." I'm like, "What?" I mean, I didn't ask him to do it, but it's like these moments of like growth when they go,
Oh yeah.
it blows your mind, man.
Yeah. I've kind of been preparing myself, and we just call like daddy daughter dates, where we just try to, because I have twin boys, as I mentioned, and we had a lot of stuff in common with the boys, right? But she was firstborn, and her and I used to do like we'd go out and see like the new Cinderella movie came out, and I'm like, hey, let's go see that, or let's go like whatever our common interest is. Like she's craftsy, and I'll take her to like Michael's or Joann's, and help her get the stuff and help her put it together if she doesn't know how to do it, and stuff like that. And she, I'm a bit of a tech dork, and she is too. And like, so it might be putting together some computer thing or learning some new app on. She's very creative, so like editing video for. She had a YouTube channel and does a lot of stuff with social, and so we'll bond over that stuff. And it's stuff that my wife's not, it's just not her cup of tea, right? And this year I'm like, man, I'm kind of thinking where your head's, you already know. I've had buddies who've sent their kids off to school, and I'm like, hey, hey, can we go get a daddy daughter ski day, or something like that? And we have a place up in the mountains here, and some weekends my boys can't go, and I'm like, hey, you want to go, just you and me, and go up there and do it. And it was funny. She reached out a couple of weeks ago, and she's like, hey, she goes, I think it was before a long weekend. She goes, hey, how about we both play hooky on Friday and get up to the mountains to get a day skiing in before the crowds come, And I was like, yes. And before I responded, I'm like, oh, wait, I got to run this by my wife first, to make sure she's not like, hey, and it was so cool. We went up there, we had our ski day. We went out to dinner together. You know, one form of bonding I've done with her is like, she has a certain interest in shows, like when she watched Stranger Things or shows like that. And she didn't want to watch them by herself. She wanted a buddy, and then I'd watch a couple episodes, and then we'd watch the whole series together. So like Stranger Things, whatever, 4 seasons. And then she started watching like Emily in Paris, which, yes, I do like. And but we bonded together, and it's like, hey, we can't watch an episode without each other, And it
Oh,
just,
that's awesome.
it's 30 minutes of just sitting together, talking about the show and enjoying it, and it's just finding our commonalities of what we like to do. And the last thing I'll tie it up with, there was a movie that we both went. Oh, it was the new Dune movie, Dune 2. It came out, I think, last summer. And her and I went to go see it in the theaters together because nobody else was really interested in it. And we're sitting there in the dark theater, and we looked at each other, and we were both sitting here like this with our hands up in the same exact way watching the movie. And we just kind of looked at each other and just smiled because we have so much sometimes in common, or commonalities. It's just like, you are my daughter.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy as they get older, man. Like all the things, the good things we do, the bad things we do,
Yeah.
it's in them. And when it comes out, it's like, um, yeah, I mean, as we all know, it just keeps getting better and better and better.
One thing I will say to caution, I've told this to other parents. I know this is the QE dad, right? This is a thing I learned not to do as much. And you and I know each other a little bit, but growing up, I kind of had a quick wit and probably a heavy dose of sarcasm in the way I communicated. And I like to think of myself as a comedian, and you point out the irony or sarcastic things. And when my kids were small, I don't think they really got it, right? And then once they're teenagers, when they started saying stuff back to me in a sarcastic way, I'm like, I have nobody to blame for that but myself. And then I really changed my approach on sarcasm. And I always thought it was funny and biting comments, but when it got served back up to me, a dirty ashtray, a greasy pork sandwich, I was like, I do not like that at all. And I need to look in the mirror and kind of fix myself a little bit, and be a better role model to them, because as you said, they are a reflection. And unfortunately, I'm not perfect. And when I see things reflected that I don't like, I'm like, I need to clean up my act.
Was that a Weird Science reference?
Yes.
Solid. See, I have one buddy. Shout out to Josh McFadden, former guest on the podcast, who is a huge Pearl Jam fan, by the way.
Oh,
Uh,
great.
he goes, Jaycox, if it wasn't for '80s movies, you wouldn't be funny.
Yeah. That's good. So and this is, I'm curious to explore this with you because your kids are a little bit older than mine, but the reason that reference is fresh in my head. So I watched Weird Science probably 100 times on
Right there with you.
Betamax
Same
when I
thing,
was a
bro.
kid.
Yeah.
My brother Steve and I would watch that movie. We knew every line. I used to dream if I had a house as cool as theirs and actually had my own bathroom instead of sharing it with three siblings. And, that scene where they're like pretending to shave in there. Anyway, so I love that movie. And like any parent, there's certain movies from your childhood you want to show to your kids. Like I remember when we showed our kids E.T., and I remember I saw E.T. when I was 8 years old, right? And I remember showing it to my kids. And in the opening scene, they're sitting there talking about dick jokes and smoking cigarettes and like blowjobs and like all this different stuff. And the mom's like smoking cigarettes in the house. And I'm like, holy crap. Like, I didn't not remember this being, there's so much gratuity, gratuitous behavior in these 80s movies and just, always nudity and stuff. But anyway, a weird science always held a special place in my heart. And I was up in our mountain place with my boys and another buddy and his son. And we always talk about, go skiing in the day and watch a movie at night. And I'm like, let's watch Weird Science, and I was just hoping it held up, and that I didn't have to fast forward too much. And I think, to my honest opinion, I think it held up great. And my boys are in 8th grade in the movie. The guys are in 9th grade, right? And the opening scene when they're sitting there looking at the cheerleaders and gymnasts in the gymnasiums, and then Robert Downey Jr. pulls down the shorts behind them. I'm like, that's going to be my son's next year, and I'm like, this is so on target, like awkward young dudes, wanting to have girlfriends and stuff. And yeah, love that movie.
We're hip, we're popular, we're dear, we're studs.
That's right.
Yo, check us out.
Yes, you
Yeah,
know
I
it.
could. We should not have said that, dude. Because now I could.
Yeah.
Next time I see, you, I'm going to be quoting Weird Science every time I see you.
But what?
Yeah, you're stewed, but what? Okay, if you were to think about all of the things you and your wife are doing to raise your kids, like what? Tell me the top three most important values you hope you leave them with.
Yeah. First, I would say personal responsibility, owning your stuff, right, and knowing things start and end with you. Second, I would say realize that life is a struggle. Don't buy into the fairy tale. Happiness is a temporary state, not something you aspire to. People say, all I wanted to be was happy. And it's like, that's like the biggest thing on earth you could ever ask for, Like life is constant up and downs, and happiness is something you enjoy for a couple of minutes. And I think third, realize um, life generally will never give you more than you can't handle, and know that you are equipped to do the job.
That's really good, dude. It's funny. You make me think of when I was 23. We got married
Yeah.
young. My dad, when he had about a 20-year run of just health issues, in and out of like psych ward, bankrupt himself almost, in and out of assisted living, and it was like me and my wife taking care of him. And I used to tell myself all that. I was like, God only put He knew I can take it, and I have an
Right.
amazing wife, and the vows of deathness and sickness and health. Like Carrie, my wife,
Oh yeah.
she stood up, and there were days where I remember taking the phone and throwing it at the couch because my dad, he couldn't like listen to me, but he could listen to my wife. So it's like I think you're right. It's really good advice. Really good advice. Um, okay, I know we're getting up on time here,
Yeah.
so I'm
No
gonna be
worries.
respectful of that. But if you had to think of an area of your dad game that maybe is not where you want it, that might relate to dads at home, that if you feel comfortable sharing, I'm more than happy to go first. But if an area that your dad game, you're like, God, this is an area that sometimes it's not always the best side of Tim, but I know it and I'm working on it, and I realize that it's a lifelong journey to get better. But like, tell me what comes to mind
For myself, not my dad, right?
for you. Yeah.
Yeah. I think something for me is, I grew up Irish Catholic, right? And so, I grew up in a environment where, drinking and partying was like normal part of the thing. And I lived a good bit of my life that way. But once my kids, we live a very social life in our neighborhood, and, there, especially in the summer, there's like people at our house, their house, and, we'll carry on for hours at a time. And there's kids running around. And I think when they're little, we could get away with a lot more. But once they start getting around 12, they're like, hey, is so and so drunk or whatever, or things that you say when your tongue gets looser. it could be quite dangerous. And I actually I quit drinking about a year and a half ago,
Oh,
and
wow.
yeah, and I'm grateful for that. But I think it's something that I'm sure at certain points I was careless with, just kind of caught up in things. And I've seen other people do it because behavior does change once the drinks start flowing. And I think again, we're mirrors, right? And I've seen other families run into problems with that, and the kids start drinking at a young age, and the parents let it go, and kind of sets up some problematic behavior. So I
Yeah.
think just um one thing I heard is kids don't hear everything you say, but they see everything you do.
Yeah.
And when I heard that statement, it rang so true to me. And I think when myself or I see others drink, there's what you think you're showing, and then there's what you're actually showing, right? Kind of like the beer goggles. And I would just say to any dad out there, we convince ourselves, oh, I have a tough day, it's my time to unwind, or this and that. Is that we're signaling through our behavior that this is okay. And just like the sarcasm, if we're doing it, they're going to do it, right? And I think it's just a real slippery slope. And I'm grateful for where I am now. And I definitely probably had some slip ups, in the past. And I think it's just something to be really cautious of.
Yeah. Um, just because I'm curious, I'm going to ask, and you don't have to answer. But was there a moment that's triggered you? Said, "Hey, I got to stop because of this," or was it just like, you know what, I'm going to wake up one day and I don't want to do it anymore?
Yeah, no, I'll lean into this one. It's definitely, a vulnerable thing for me, but I've had anxiety disorder since I was 17, and when it came on, it was 1990, and there was not a lot of talk about mental health. And if you went and saw, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, people thought you needed to be in an institute, like, oh, you're seeing a shrink. And like today it's so well embraced, and that's why I'm comfortable talking about, because people lead with that now, right? And I think there's more of a general understanding, and there's books coming out called Anxious Nation, and stuff like that. So I think it is important to talk about. But yeah, so I've struggled with my anxiety disorder, all these years, right? And to any anxious person out there, if you're getting ready to have a panic attack or you're feeling anxious in a situation, people have all different types of anxiety. And when you have a drink, guess what happens to your anxiety? Goes away a little bit. Have another drink, goes away a little bit. But the trick is the next morning when you wake up, and some people call it anxiety or waking anxiety levels. Like if I didn't drink, wake up, maybe, on a scale of 1 to 10, my anxiety is at a 2, which is very manageable. If I drank and felt great the night before, when I wake up in the morning, my anxiety level will be at a 6 or 7, right? And then you get in this loop, and you're like, oh, what makes that feel better? It's called self-medication, right? And um, I was always aware of it and was careful with it. But as I worked on myself, and, I've seen a number of therapists over the years, I just realized I'd take a step forward and kept taking a couple of steps back and was not making noticeable progress. And when I turned 50, which you're about to do, I just had a hard look in the mirror and really like, hey, I want my life to be better. I'm tired. Like I would, when I would share this story with, in intimate circles, people would ask about it. I talk about Sisyphus, like rolling the rock up the hill and rolling back down, because my anxiety would get better, and I'd work on it really hard and do this, and then it would roll back down. Because there's exposure therapy and certain things you do to work on your anxiety, and it just got frustrating, because I'd make progress and then I'd roll back down and make progress, and at a certain point, you kind of get tired of the fight, and it's just like I'm exhausted from just trying. Why do I have to try so hard to get over this? And I was like, I'd gone through periods like dry January, or just, quitting for a couple months to clean up my act or lose weight, whatever. So I knew I never had a problem not drinking, like I quit drinking liquor like 12 years ago. And it was like, hey, that was, once I gave it up and I just drink beer and wine. And I promised myself, I said, if you get in that spot where you're not progressing, you just need to give it all up, and my dad was an alcoholic, a functional alcoholic. His dad was a alcoholic. And so I knew it was in my DNA. And I always promised myself, if I saw, kind of problems arising, that it's time to bow out, and I wanted to do it on my terms. I didn't want to end up, getting myself into a problem where, I had an intervention, or my wife's like, hey, if you don't stop that, I'm going to leave you, or things of that nature. Right. And I stopped, Casey, 18 months ago, and it's been a life changer. My anxiety is, I would say, 70% better. My relationship with myself, with my wife, with my business partner, with my kids is just, my energy levels are so much better. I've lost a considerable amount of weight from it. I work out a lot more. I snowboard and mountain bike a lot. My recovery ability, I've already got 25 days in this year, and usually by this point, my knees will be killing me, and I feel great, So, uh, my plus column is so stacked high, and my cons, there's not really anything in there. So I just feel fortunate that I saw the light for myself, and put myself on this path.
Shout out to you, dude. That's awesome. I've interviewed a lot of people that have talked about a getting help, no matter what it is, whether it's addiction, whether
Yeah,
it's mental health. And I've talked to a lot of dads who went sober. So shout out to you. Actually, Josh McFadden, my buddy, he talked
yeah,
about it. And I have alcoholism in my family. I have not quit yet, but
yeah,
it's definitely something that like I'm definitely aware of, and we'll go.
yeah,
I only allow myself to do a couple nights, whatever it is a week, just because I want to like stay on it. And it's when he talking
yeah.
to someone else about it, he said, the fact that you think about it that way, I'm not worried about you. It was the people who get really the problem from his perspective was you're having a pre-funk before the pre-funk,
Right.
and so,
There's a movement afoot. I mean, and there's a great guy. He's a former footballer out of the UK. He has this movement called Alcohol Free. He had a similar story to mine, and I've listened to his podcast. And he was a famous footballer, and I think there was a lot of stigmas associated with, it's quite big over in Europe, obviously everywhere but the US. And it was, I listened to it after I made the decision, but I felt the interesting thing, and I'll just steer it this way for a second. He really said, people kind of look at this dichotomy like, hey, the only people that have a problem are people like, alcoholics or heavy drinking. But that's not true. There's what they call kind of middle lane, right? Which is the people do what you just described yourself as being, and where they think, hey, as long as I'm not an alcoholic, I don't have a problem. But if you read any news out there, science is getting better in the technology all the time about the impacts of certain things. Like there's a lot of talk about microplastics and all that stuff right now. But people used to only look at alcohol like, hey, I'm fine. I don't need to drink every day or whatever. And my liver's okay. Well, now it's, hey, if you are that middle lane drinker, the cumulative effects over time on cardiac health, on cancer risk, I mean, there's a long, dirty list of things that even for moderate drinkers that can really affect your quality and length of life, that I think is giving a lot of people an opportunity to again, sober is one term, right? I mean, that's more of an AA thing. Alcohol free is something. I think if we talk sober, it usually means it got quite problematic, right, for folks. And went had to go maybe go to in treatment program. Like me, I just quit. Like I didn't go to a program. I've been in therapy for plenty of things, and I felt like I was on a good track, and I knew where I needed to go. Um, and I'm not saying my way is right for everybody, but it worked
yeah,
for me, right? And like the way you asked me about it, I have so many people ask about it, and I can always tell they're waiting to hear about the car crash, or getting kicked out of the house, or like something traumatic, and they're always kind of disappointed that I don't have that. And I'm sorry I don't, but for me, my anxiety story and the self medication is just as real. It's just
big time.
different, and I just want to shine a light on it because millions of people are suffering. And I know the thing with anxiety is, my experience, I felt quite alone and embarrassed or ashamed to bring it up. We're in a much more open society now, but that's why I like to call it out, because I spent years where I couldn't talk about it to anybody for risk of being a pariah, or people looking down on me, or like, oh, you shouldn't be in the position you're in, if you have that, and that's all BS.
I applaud your vulnerability. When I started this podcast almost 6 years ago, well, actually over 6 years ago, I wanted to create spaces to have these types of conversations with dads, because
Yeah,
most dads don't open up about this type of stuff. And it's been really, really fun to impact people and have the right person. If we can get the right person to listen to it, that maybe is going through what you just went through, that says, "Huh, if Tim did it, why can't I do it?"
Yeah.
So, thank you for being honest. And
Yeah, no, and Casey, I appreciate you. I mean, I know when we met in person, I instantly liked you. I listened to your presentation and TED and everything else, and I had to leave early for a flight, and I was really bummed I didn't get to see the whole thing. But you're a special guy. I appreciate you. I appreciate what you're doing. I've listened to earlier versions of this podcast and just the way you connect with guys, and I think you're quite thoughtful in your approach. And I think you're doing this for the right reasons.
awesome, man. That means a lot. I really appreciate you saying that.
Yeah.
Um, okay, I want to give some love to Bridgeview. Talk to us about what you guys are doing. If people want to learn more about the company,
Yeah.
like let's make sure that we, because I really liked how you approached yourself at that presentation, our conversation. So I think it'd be cool to just to make sure everybody else knows about what you guys are doing.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I'll be quick with it. And you've been in the industry, so I know you get it, but just to the listeners that aren't in the industry and know what we do. So, yeah, broadly, we're a technology consulting firm. What that means in reality, we started as an IT staffing firm in 2005 and quickly kind of found ourselves as an outlier because we were doing a lot of hybrid work with our clients and kind of getting in some special air with them as a go-to vendor, and clients would ask us more and more about consultative work, and then we built out a consulting division, and then from that we built out what we call the blended solution, which is IT staffing plus consulting. And people may say, well, what does that mean? Well, IT staffing is just, hey, you have a clearly identified problem, you need specific skill sets for a certain duration of time, and get me those skills, right? What we learned is that sounds clean. It's usually not that clean. And they would get these resources that they're paying a lot of money for, and they don't get the outcome they want. And they needed a bit more strategy and advisory in what they were doing in their approach, instead of just pure manpower. And so, through lessons learned and working with hundreds of clients on numerous engagements, and it all comes down to, like, they're generally implementing something, or they have a proof of concept, or they had a failed implementation or failed adoption of it. Is we have experts that could come in and just really meet our client where they're at in the journey, and that's the consulting piece, like really synthesizing the situation quickly and then giving the right prescription for their situation. Like, hey, we think you need a little bit of consulting fairy dust on this just to help out with the strategy and get alignment, but you don't need a bunch of bench consultants. We think, at a better cost for you, we're gonna have two of our consultants help out on the strategy, kind of guide this project, but then we're gonna plug in some traditional staff aug into kind of the meat and potatoes work that they're doing. Because you've been around when you're your K-Force days, where what we realized when we went into clients, especially large enterprise clients, they have Accenture in there, they have Slalom in there, they have K-Force in there, they have Bridgeview in there, and everything was kind of bit by bit. It wasn't one person owning the whole thing, and we really wanted to help put a wrapper around things and make sure we were looking out for the client and not just getting their business, but actually helping them hit their objectives and understanding what the objectives were and the deadlines and the goals. And so it's really, hey, the core of it is the IT staffing, but making sure they're using it in a meaningful way.
Mm, I like that. That was really well said. Are there specific industries that people might that you guys find yourself doing more work in?
Yeah, I'll talk about industries and also technology. With industries, we do a lot of work in the financial services industries and fintech, and large financial companies. Typically, because they have a lot of custom in-house applications, very transaction based, and a lot of regulations around it. We work in the technology space. We work in aerospace. Do a lot with a lot of companies putting satellites in the sky, ground control systems, systems that work within rockets, also within healthcare, and within government are the main core segments that we work in. The wrinkle with us compared to average firms is we tend to work with highly complex clients, that it's not just getting a rec and being an order taker, but somebody could understand. Like, if a client comes to us and says we need a Java developer, we don't go, okay, tell us about the Java developer. We say, why do you need a Java developer? What are they doing? What are they part of? Are they part of a team? What are their deliverables look like? Right. So we don't want to just know the skills. We want to know the context and the scope and the scale of what they're doing. so we could truly find the right fit for them and make sure that it is staffing and not a staffing and consulting, or more of a consulting than a staffing. Um, because we're focused on the outcome, and if we help them achieve success, they're going to keep coming back to us. And they might just be looking at the immediate kind of aggravation, which is like, hey, I need another person. But we're looking at, well, tell us why you need another person. So the why is more important to us than the what. And then as far as technologies, we definitely skew towards the app dev side of the world. Um, so most things we do around application development, cloud technologies, replatforming, again, from older legacy systems to newer systems, or getting people, from on-prem to in the cloud, or re-architecting the cloud solution that they're in, if they're on Oracle Cloud and they want to go to AWS. Additionally, we do a lot of work with data. Everything involves data. So whether it's data architecture, data integration, or data engineering and dashboarding, a lot of that work. And then our other third practice that we do a ton with is around integrating AI and machine learning, either building native systems to that, or augmenting systems with that technology.
Love it. I'll give you a shout out. Sometimes executives, brother, they don't have the sales chops or the communication skills.
Yeah.
So you're keeping yourself sharp. I like to see this.
I try. What came up is that, I started recruiting and sales and worked my way up. So I think, Chris and I, my business partner, like we always say, we're willing to jump into any role in the company and stay current. And so whether it's jumping in with the recruiting team, the consulting team, or the sales team, or the marketing team, so we jump in a lot and really try to keep our chops up. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, it's hopefully your company appreciates that bike, because I know I've seen a lot in the industry, and I've seen a lot of times companies where people you lose track of the why,
Yeah.
and it causes a lot of problems. So where can people find you? If people have been intrigued by your story, they want to connect with you, they want to find Bridgeview. Tell me, what's the easiest way people can find you and your company?
Yeah, I mean, and hopefully you could drop it in the show notes too, but the website is bridgeviewit.com. So it's like a bridge over water, and view like a view out your window, it.com. LinkedIn, they could go on there and easily find me. Just type in Tim Glennnie, last name's Glennie. We do a ton on LinkedIn with, educational videos, links, logs, articles, etc. So that's kind of our main go-to platform there. Yeah, and appreciate that. And people could reach out if they want to talk about something business related. They want to talk about, alcohol free, or they want to talk about anxiety. Casey, I've been very fortunate in my life, and I'm 52, and at this stage, I try to spend as much time giving back and mentoring or advising or just sharing my experience. I'm an experience-based teacher. I don't tell people what to do. I tell them what I did and let them draw their conclusions out of it, versus saying, go do this. I'm always going to tell a why, not just go what to do, but why you should do it, and what the balance looks like of the different options. So that's my approach and what you get when dealing with me.
Love it. I will make sure this is all connected in the show notes. It is now time to go into what I call the lightning round.
Sure.
And thanks for hanging with us, everybody. This is one of our longer episodes, but it's been too good to not end it. So, we're going to end it here with the lightning round. This is where I show you the negative hits of taking too many hits in college, not bong hits, but football hits. And your job is to answer these questions as quickly as you can. My job is to try to get a giggle out of you.
Okay.
Okay. True or false? You have a purple haze tattoo on the lower back of yourself.
False.
Okay. True or false? You are considered the Chet in the staffing industry.
False.
Last
I
book
hope
you read.
not.
The last book you read was.
The last book I read was Greenlight by Matthew McConaughey.
Okay, I read it. It's a really good book. If I went into your phone and played some music, what would be one song that might surprise your employees?
Bullet in Your Head by Rage Against the Machine.
God, hardcore. There we go. If you were going to go on a vacation right now, just you and Anastasia, where are you going?
If just the two of us were going on vacation, I'd say we'd probably go to Costa Rica. Probably go to by Arenal up at the springs up there.
Okay. Um, Favorite comedy movie ever is?
God, that is a tough one. But this is quick. So, Caddyshack.
Solid. No, 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 no. I could go on that one forever too.
Yeah.
If I came to your house for dinner tonight, what would we have?
Ooh, Thursday night. Well, I'm going to the Nuggets game and eating there, so you'd be eating with my wife and two of my kids because I'm taking the other kid to the game. But if you were eating there tonight, probably wouldn't be chicken because we had that last night. So I'm going to guess tonight is either going to be a salad with a protein or some sort of Mexican taco burrito dish.
There we go. I'm jealous you have an NBA team. Our lovely Sonics are gone. Hopefully, we'll be back. We're now hockey people.
Gary Payton, back in the day.
Well, the
Yeah, I
Nuggets,
mean,
the Nuggets
Sean
beat us.
Kemp,
Yeah,
Detlef Schrempf. Yeah, 1995, first ever do it in a seven-game series. Yeah,
yeah,
it's class. Yeah, we
I,
got a great team right now, so I'm trying to enjoy it.
yeah. Okay, and then last question would be, well, actually, two last questions. If there was to be a book written about your life, tell me the title.
Uh, seriously, question, exclamation point.
Okay, so seriously, question mark, exclamation point. Now is crushing it. Every airport is selling out of this book. Every airport, every Barnes and Noble, Amazon, they can't print enough copies because everybody wants to read it. So now Netflix has decided to make a movie about it. You are now the casting
Yeah.
director. I need to know who's going to star Tim Glenney in this new, critically acclaimed hit new movie.
Oh, Jason Segel.
Okay, there we go. And last question. Tell me two words that would describe your wife.
Beautiful and smart.
There we go. Lightning round's complete. We both giggled. I always laugh at my own jokes because that's what good dads do. This has been an absolute blast. This has been one of the longer episodes. Thanks for hanging in with everybody. Thank you for, Tim, just your honesty, your vulnerability, and spending some time with me today. I want to make sure that if this episode has touched you at home, please do us a favor. Go to where you listen to your podcast and leave us a review. Or even better yet, share this episode with somebody who you think can gain value out of it. I do this for free, everybody. I get paid back in this thing called karma. There's a lot of people think, oh, you're like a podcaster. It's like, is that your job? I'm like, no, it's actually just like a project, and it's so fun. And I've met some amazing people. You're one of them, Tim. But I wanted to say thank you guys for your continued support. And Tim, hopefully our paths will cross again where I can see it live in person. Appreciate you, brother.
I appreciate you, Casey.